We need it. Oxygen. It's why we breathe.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Grit Files. And you know me, your hostess, Dr. LL, Loralyn Mears, in the house here. Very happy to be with another couple of folks who are focused in the education space and bringing innovative technology and ways to be able to inspire the art and the gift of learning. As we were talking about earlier, just before the podcast, I mean, who doesn't know a young child who is just craving that opportunity to learn and grow? Right? Children are little sponges. They want everything. And Jennifer Moscato is here to talk about one-third stories. And you're thinking, one-third story? Where's the rest of the story? She's also here with her guest, Darren Moscato, who plays a supporting role in operations. And yes, they are a husband and wife tag team duo. And we're going to talk about all that fun too, living and working together on the same thing. So with that, Jennifer and Darren, welcome to the Grit Files.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us here. As I said, we just really appreciate the opportunity to be here and your support of entrepreneurs.
Well, it works both ways, right? This is just it. Everybody needs that little bit of something that someone can do and help somebody else. And if we just boomerang it right back here to you into one-third stories, little kiddos need our help. And I understand that you've got a terrific and tremendous background and education and those learning experiences. Maybe let's start there, right? Like every podcast does, and get folks grounded in your background and the route that took you to one-third stories.
Sure. So I've basically had two career tracks. One of them was a teacher, a reading teacher, and a literacy specialist, aside from being a stay-at-home mom as well. So maybe I should say three career tracks. And then I've owned several businesses with Darren together. So a few years ago, I just really felt this need to find a business that I felt brought together my interests in education and reading, but still allowed me to be entrepreneurial. And so we looked at, language learning schools, we looked at childcare centers, and came across One-Third Stories. We loved One-Third Stories' mission to instill a love of language learning in children using storytelling. And the more I, researched it and I learned about the benefits, the long-term benefits of learning a language at a young age, I was just hooked and had to have it and had to be involved.
I see. And Darren, we don't want you just being, like Zoom candy here in the background. You play a role. Let's hear about your background and not just your relationship here with Jennifer, but what value and what ideas and things can you bring from your background into the business?
Mhm. Yeah, my background is in engineering and management. About half of my career I've spent being self-employed with Jennifer, and the other half of my career I've worked for Fortune 500 companies in startup entrepreneurships in their organizations. My role at One-Third Stories is really a support role, and that role has changed over the last year plus that we've owned One-Third Stories. But I work more on the operational side to allow a lot of the vision that Jennifer has for the business to be produced operationally.
And before we even get into the rest of it and children and learning and new ways to acquire new languages, like I said, they're little sponges. And if you just feed it to them early, right, they can really grow and absorb it. Let's talk about this whole dynamic that folks have. We've had a number of couples on, or father and child teams, and people that live together and work together. It's fun and it's awkward and it's stressful, and there's all these different dimensions. People these days, particularly entrepreneurs, have been really hard hit. Mental health is at an all-time low, not just for entrepreneurs, but for people in general. And a large part of it is the difficulties we are seeing with the economy and everything else. So talk to us about the boundaries that you set where this is work and this is life, because I think our audience would really be into that.
Yeah, I guess I would say for us, I think we understand because we've gone through the startup phase or the new business phase several times. I think we both have an understanding that it's hard to have we try to stay in our own lane in terms of the different tasks and responsibilities we have. But in terms of blurring like home life and work life, I think we realize that sometimes you can't have that balance in the beginning. And maybe that sounds bad to say, but I think we both recognize that, I've started calling it the work end because, on the weekend, there are things that we sometimes have to do when we're managing two businesses. And, it allows us to be flexible with our time sometimes, but the other side of it is there are just things that have to get done in the evening or while we're driving home from work together or while we're, having a meal together. And then once we get past this phase, then we can have that balance a little bit more. But that's, I think, what I would say about that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we've been successful at it because we each know our priorities, and our priority is the marriage. Nothing comes before that. Nothing's more important than that. We've had friends and peers who did not have that understanding going in, and both the job and their marriage suffered. So that worked for us. That at the end of the day, marriage comes first, and a deep respect for one another. If Jennifer is in charge, like she mentions, being in her lane, if she makes a decision that's in her lane, it may be what I would have done. It may not have been what I did, but I respect it because I respect Jennifer and her thinking, her thought process, and just knowing that you can't control all the decisions, nor would you want to, and just respecting the others' input.
Yeah, I mean, we sort of had this little rule we try to just live by that if, like, we try to keep just one person having that day where it's like, I just want to sail away and just ditch, this whole entrepreneurial lifestyle. I'm just going to go, cruise away.
Only one of us can do that.
Only one of us can do that at a time. The other one has to be the cheerleader and kind of keep motivating and looking on the bright side. So I think that we really do try to like take turns being that cheerleader for each other too.
And that's so critical too, right? We all need that fanfare in the background going rah rah, because even on those really easy days, we know those easy days are not going to be long lived, right? There's something coming after that. And you talk about the glorious, early startup and sort of, still forming and norming phase. I'm in a different trajectory in my phase of my startup. I'm in the valley of death. And it's a very, very scary place. You need a lot of cheerleaders. So let's come back and let's talk about the love of learning and how One Third Stories works, because it's such a creative name. And if you really think about it, it makes sense. But just to kind of spell it out for our audience, what does it really mean? How does it work?
Yeah, the way it really works is we have stories that start in English and gradually introduce another language. So it's very clever in the sense that it just very naturally happens. Like I said, most of the time parents or caregivers are reading to children anyways. And so you're enjoying this original, beautifully illustrated story. And as I said, it starts in English and then gradually you'll see bolded words that are in the other language. And it's done in just such a subtle way that it just makes learning very enjoyable. And we have story boxes. So it comes with the story. It comes with a link to a downloadable audiobook, which is great because even before the family gets the book, the storybook, they can be listening to the audiobook for the pronunciation. And all of our audiobooks are narrated by bilingual voice actors. So they just sound incredible. We have an activity book that comes with it. We have flashcards and we have additional activities. Like sometimes they're like those old fashioned cutouts where you like dress the dolls. You're practicing the clothing words. Sometimes it's put together dinosaurs that you're using. So just a variety of different materials that really allow kids to manipulate things and learn with their hands. They're listening, they're reading, they're writing, they're speaking. So just a whole all-encompassing experience.
And the name of the business itself, the One Third Stories, comes from the original founders, where they had the phrase where it was 1/3 language, 1/3 culture, 1/3 stories, 100% fun.
Oh, I got it. So there's a couple of things in there. So first, Jennifer, with your background and as a learning specialist, I saw where you were going, that people are visual learners, they're kinesthetic learners, they're audio learners. And the way that One Third Stories is packaged with things that are touchable and tangible, as well as things that you can listen and things that you can do, I can see the appeal to a lot of different learning styles. Where I want to come back to those were the whole idea where you're basically doing a sneak attack, right? It's like those moms that make cauliflower crust pizza or put a little, some peas and some kale in the pasta, right? This is what you're doing. You're doing a sneak attack and getting languages into kids' heads and the parents. I think it's brilliant. Talk to us about how that works. Do they ever realize they're part of a sneak attack?
Well, I think we get a lot of great feedback from parents about that, and I love it. And when we talked about how we handle those kind of tough days, it's like one of the great things is to kind of go back and read these like unsolicited comments we get from parents that say, we've been learning, we've been trying to teach our daughter Spanish for a couple of years now, and this is the first time she's actually speaking Spanish to us after reading these stories because they're just so much fun and we're just talking together. The other thing that I think is really great about it is many times when there's other language programs, which again have their place, but the child is just doing them and the parent might not be learning the language. So it's very hard to like reinforce it or talk together. But this way, as you're reading it, you're both learning it. And I guess as an adult, we can get like nervous about learning a new language, or little kids, like you said, they're sponges. They're not nervous about it at all. And so I think also for the parents, they're not nervous about speaking the words because you're doing it together in a very safe way. So I think the parents definitely realize they're learning the language, but one of the great pieces of feedback we get is that the children, like they hardly realize it. It's this hidden vegetables, method of learning. That was something that a parent told us. It's like, hidden vegetables, they're enjoying it, they're speaking it, but they hardly even realize like that they're learning something. It's just fun.
And I think it taps into this whole buddy system thing, whether it's the parent, the guardian, the teacher, somebody else reading. What we're starting to see are the effects of extended asynchronous learning. It's not that asynchronous learning is bad. It certainly has a place. It helps a lot of kids, particularly those that are on the spectrum and are easily distracted. It gives them the opportunity to dial in and not worry about their classmates taking them away from their focus on learning. But we're starting to see the effects that it's not working for everyone. People aren't focused enough on the content. They're not absorbing it. They're finding ways to game the system, to play the quizzes and to get it right. Like, yeah, I got 10 out of 10, but they skipped over all of the videos and just really guessed very smartly. So let's talk about the place that your tool at One Third Story has in the classroom as well as in the home you've talked about. But in the classroom, is there a place for it?
So our customers are both in the US and in the UK. And in the UK, our families there, or the students there, are introduced to languages much earlier. So oftentimes we have schools, especially at the preschool age, that are very interested in our product. And then in the US, because we do start languages a little bit older, we often have schools that are interested in using it as an enrichment program. So a lot of after school programs, have reached out to us and have used the program that way. So there is definitely a place for it. And one of the things I told you, we're kind of sneak peeking talking about it here, but we are coming out with a digital component too over the next 3 to 6 months. So excited. And so that will definitely have, even greater application to schools as well.
Absolutely. What I want to dig into now, one of the things that our audience really likes hearing about is how you've changed on this journey so far. We heard a little bit about the separation of the roles, where Darren's getting more and more involved with his business that he's doing, so he can't play the same role of support. And now you're taking on more and doing this. So talk about your evolution as the owner here of One Third Stories, and what have you learned about yourself?
Yeah, I think that I've always known that I had in my personal life that grit, because I had to for some things that I've encountered. So to borrow, your word grit, because of some things that I encountered, I really have always been a person that I see an obstacle and I'm able to just get through it and move on and find creative solutions. And so what I found about myself is that I'm able to find that same trait and apply it to business when we've had, some pretty large challenges this year thrown our way. Yeah, there's that moment where I'm like, oh my gosh, how are we going to handle this? And then it's like, okay, wait a minute, let's try this thing or let's try that thing, and really like tapping into that desire to be creative and solving a challenge. And I think it's just been a good feeling of empowerment, right? So some things that in the past, like negotiation is something I think I mentioned earlier, where I might have always just turned to Darren, like, how about you talk to this person and negotiate this for me? I've had to take on some of that responsibility in that role. And I might not always do it perfectly. I might have been able to get more if I negotiated more, but I think just the sense that I'm starting to do that has helped, like I said, kind of empower me and made me feel good to know that I've been able to handle those situations.
And Darren, you're an entrepreneur too. How have you grown through the experiences of the multiple businesses that you've been a part of?
Yeah, some of the things we've learned in the last year, because this is our first e-commerce business. We've never had one before, so it's been a very steep learning curve. We've learned some hard lessons in working with vendors. What do they say? Experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. We got a lot of experience this year working with vendors, saying they were going to do something and not doing it. Vendors who come recommended from people who we trusted, who let us down. So really making sure that we stay on top of vendors and make sure we qualify them and define the scope of the contract up front, what's in the contract, what's out of the contract. That's been a real learning curve in the space of e-commerce this year.
I'd like to even just tailgate on that a bit, if I may. I'm currently in a situation where I have two vendors. This is the three of which had not paid. Now we're only down to two. I got something out of one of the other clients, actually, not vendors. I am the vendor to them. And you're just thinking, wow, how much do you focus on and do you vet and do you deep dive into the negotiations and into the contract and the potential for litigation? It just gets ugly and it thwarts the sale. So maybe we could talk about that, because this is a complaint I'm increasingly hearing from entrepreneurs like yourselves, where they've paid money for a service that hasn't been rendered or hasn't been rendered to the quality that they've expected, or they've been overbilled for it. They thought it would be this, but it was this plus X. Talk to us about the best practices and which you'd like to advise other folks out there on what to do when it comes to due diligence on a vendor, on a client, and how much do you get into the weeds of a contract?
Yeah, that's good. I'll let you get some of this. The one thing I guess I would say is I've definitely learned that I have to educate myself about whatever the item is, whether it's like web development work or something that we're doing with this digital platform or whatever. And you can't always be the expert on everything, but I am finding that I really need to learn enough about it so that whatever this item is that I'm going to have a vendor work on, so that I can talk intelligently about it, I can ask the right questions, I can, I can communicate what I want them to do very clearly. I'm using the same language with them. So that's been one, lesson and maybe a piece of advice is just, don't totally turn it all over to someone. At least learn a little bit enough about it yourself, and read those contracts. I mean, we have found out a lot of things that were kind of buried in there that I've had to and sometimes vendors are surprised, like, oh, you actually read all of that. But it's important. And sometimes if you get a contract that's very long, there's stuff buried in there, and you just need to make sure that you read it. And if you need to bring in a lawyer to do that, fine, but just make sure it's read and that you fully understand it. And if you have a question or your gut's telling you something, don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah, I can't say it better than that. Trust but verify. You want to have trust in people, but you need to have checks. You need to have ways of holding people accountable. And unless, like Jennifer said, unless you have some base knowledge, it's hard to hold people accountable because you don't know. And especially for the critical path items in a business, you need to have some understanding of it, enough to hold people accountable.
It's right, because there's cauliflower hiding in the contracts, right? More sneak attacks. This is what we've got to look for. That's kind of the message there. You had another powerful message. And just as we're getting ready to wrap up here, you talked about the drill and kill approach that so many schools are taking. Let's hear a little bit about that and to better understand why there's so much success behind 1/3 stories and its approach, because it flies in the face of the drill and kill approach. Just let us know, Jennifer, that path and why that works.
Yeah, I think it works just because this is the first exposure the child is having to it and having to the language. And so if it's a positive one, we're really looking at it for the long term, the long haul. We want them to love languages. So our whole goal is that they're going to think that learning Spanish, learning French, whatever the language is enjoyable, it's fun. And so if they believe that it's fun and they can buy into it, then they're going to keep doing it. I mean, I think of our own child who we could not get him to memorize his math facts when he was a little guy, but he knew like hundreds of these Pokemon characters, right? Because he was interested in that. And so I think that's what it is, just, helping them to believe in it and to buy into language learning, and you will hook them for life. And there are just so many long-term benefits to children for learning a language.
Oh, we've seen it. I've lived it. I had math teachers that said, math isn't for girls. But I grew up with my dad, who's an advanced chemical engineer, and he's a girl dad with 3 girls. And he's like, math is for girls, right? So I was like, teacher, you're wrong, right? You've got to have that and keep it going. So how can folks find you, Jennifer?
Yeah, at our website, 1/3stories.com.
Spelled out.
Yep. Yeah. ONETHIRDSTORIES.
Excellent. So with that, I want to wrap up our podcast here and really appreciate Jennifer and Darren Moscato, backers and owners and operators of 1/3 Stories, which is a wonderful new way to be able to introduce the love of languages and language learning to not even just young children. It works on adults too, who are learning along with the child that they're supporting. So thank you for that. And I wish you tremendous success and a much better 2024.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for all you do.
Have a great day. Thanks.
And how about that fantastic intro by Touch Circle?